This is my real story. I gave my life to my son. I worked hard, day and night, to give him everything I could. But one day, he shouted at me in front of the whole family, "You're a shame to this family." Those words cut deep into my heart. I could not stay silent. I decided to speak the truth where everyone would hear. I chose the family festival. I knew the moment would matter. I knew it would teach him a lesson. Before I share the rest, tell us where you are watching from now, and please subscribe so my story reaches more people. I spent my whole life working hard so my son could have a better life than I had. I worked in the sun, in cold, in rain, without rest, without complaint. I gave him my time, my strength, my health, and my savings. I missed my own comforts so he could have food, clothes, and an education. I wore worn shoes, old coats, and carried tired bones so he could stand tall. I believed every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, would turn into respect and love from him. For decades, I built a life for him. I gave him my dreams, my hopes, my sacrifices. I worked long hours at the market, at the farm, doing any job I could find. I never complained because I believed that a father's duty was to give without asking. I believed that he would grow to understand one day. I thought when I grew old, he would stand by me and honor me. I thought the years would make him grateful. I thought he would protect the family name. I lived for my son. Every penny I earned went into his future. I paid for his school fees, his books, his training. I stayed hungry so he could eat. I wore torn clothes so he could wear clean ones. I worked through sickness so he could sleep in peace. I gave him my health, but I kept going because I thought that love was enough. I thought that what I gave would be returned in respect and care. I never imagined it could turn into cruelty. I never thought my sacrifices would be thrown back in my face. I never thought that the son I raised would speak words to break my soul. I believed that respect was part of family. I believed that love was the reward for years of giving. I thought he would see the hard work I had done for him. I thought he would remember the nights I stayed awake so he could sleep. I thought he would carry my name with pride. But life is not always as we hope. My son grew older. The care I gave was taken for granted. The respect I expected was replaced with silence. The love I showed was answered with neglect. I saw him change. I saw pride enter his heart, not for our family, but for himself. I saw arrogance grow where humility should have stayed. I saw the man I raised becoming someone I did not know. I remember thinking it was a phase. I told myself he would come back. I told myself patience was the answer. But the years went by, and the patience broke. The respect never returned. The love never grew. The distance between us grew wider. And one day, my son spoke words that I could never take back, words that shattered everything I had built in my heart. That day, at the family gathering, he stood in front of everyone and shouted at me, "You're a shame to this family." Those words cut deeper than any wound. They pierced through years of sacrifice, years of silence, years of giving. It was as if all the nights I worked, all the days I gave, were worthless. Those words were a final blow to my dignity. That day, I felt both broken and alive. I sat alone after hearing those words. I thought about my life. I thought about every moment I gave to him. I thought about the nights I slept with hunger so he could have food. I thought about the years I worked without rest. I thought about every scar in my body, every ache in my heart, every tear in my eyes. I knew that silence would no longer be my answer. I knew that I could not let those words pass without action. I knew that a lesson must be given, a truth must be told. I decided I would stand in a place where everyone could hear. I decided I would show the world his cruelty. I decided I would not be a silent victim anymore. I would make sure that the truth was revealed, not with anger, but with proof. I began collecting evidence quietly. I wrote down every insult, every act of cruelty. I saved messages where he mocked me. I kept notes of the days he humiliated me. I spoke to neighbors who had seen the way he treated me. I kept photographs of the bruises he left. I gathered proof of the lies he spread. Slowly, quietly, I built my case. I prepared myself for the right moment. I knew it must be public. I knew it must be seen. I knew it must be remembered. I watched the calendar, waited for the festival. I knew this was the right time. The festival was a gathering where the whole family and the community would be present. It was a place of honor and pride. That day, I would turn my pain into truth. The first signs of disrespect came slowly. At first, they were small words, soft but cutting. He began speaking sharply, as if my advice was nonsense. He stopped listening to what I said. I tried to remind myself it was youth, that he was finding his way. But his words grew sharper with time. I began to hear mockery in his voice. He would laugh at my stories and traditions. He stopped asking about my health. He stopped caring if I ate well or rested. He began to speak in ways that were not respectful. Sometimes he would make jokes about me in front of others. He did not hide his disdain. It was a change that made my heart ache quietly. I watched him dismiss years of my sacrifice. He treated our family traditions as old and meaningless. He laughed at the things I held dear. He told others that my ways were outdated. He ignored my attempts to teach him values. His eyes showed pride, but not in me. They showed pride in himself, in his own achievements. The respect I thought would grow with years of giving was fading. The care I had given was now replaced by arrogance. I began to feel invisible in my own home. The man I had raised was becoming a stranger. He no longer spoke with warmth. His voice carried sarcasm and impatience. I wondered when this change had begun. It was not sudden. It was like a slow leak in a strong wall. Each day, a small crack appeared. Each conversation added another crack. He stopped honoring promises made to me. He avoided my questions and concerns. I stayed silent, believing time would heal the rift. But silence only made the gap wider. My patience lasted years, but it had limits. I knew something was breaking inside me. I knew that respect was slipping away. I knew that the silence I kept was no longer protecting me. It was allowing disrespect to grow. I began to feel a shadow over our home, a shadow born from hurt and betrayal. I still remembered the times he was a child, the days when his eyes would shine with trust, when he ran to me for comfort, when his laughter filled my home. Those days were gone, replaced by sharp words and cold shoulders. The change pained me deeply, but I stayed silent. I still hoped he would come back. But respect cannot be forced. It cannot be demanded. It must be given freely. I gave him respect all my life. I gave him sacrifice, love, and care. Yet, he returned none of it. Instead, he returned disdain. I wondered if my silence was mistaken for weakness. I wondered if my patience was taken for granted. This silence continued until the day his cruelty became clear, until the day he declared in front of others, "You're a shame to this family." That day was the end of my patience. That day was the turning point in my heart. That day I decided silence would no longer serve me. I began to see clearly. I began to understand that his disrespect was not about me alone. It was about the lack of values he carried. It was about the absence of humility. It was about a choice to disrespect rather than to understand. That realization was both painful and freeing. I knew then that I must act. I knew the disrespect could not end with silence. I knew that my dignity and the truth must be defended. I could not undo the years of disrespect, but I could change what came next. I would not let his words remain unchallenged. I would turn them into proof. I began to keep records. I wrote down each word, each act of disrespect. I saved notes, kept witnesses, and recorded what I could. I made photographs of moments when I was humiliated. I stored every proof carefully. I wanted the truth to be undeniable when the time came. That time came sooner than I thought. The years of silent suffering had built within me a resolve. I knew the truth must be spoken loudly. I knew the lesson must be seen clearly. I knew the moment of revelation must be unforgettable, and the festival was that moment. I waited. I watched. I prepared. The festival was the place where family and friends gathered. It was a place of pride, of honor. That would be the place where I revealed what had been hidden. That would be the place where truth would break the silence. That would be the place where respect would be restored. The day came quietly, but it left a wound that would never heal. That day was unlike any before. I had already felt the coldness in my son's voice. I had already felt the distance between us grow, but I was not ready for the words he would speak. They were not words of disagreement. They were words of destruction, words meant to wound the soul. It happened in the heat of an argument, the kind of argument that began small but grew large, the kind of argument where hurt and anger spill out uncontrolled. I tried to speak calmly, to explain myself, but his words were sharp and quick. He did not listen. He did not care. He only wanted to hurt. Then he shouted, not softly, not quietly, but loudly and with force. The words came out like a blade. "You're a shame to this family," he said. The moment those words landed, silence fell. The air grew heavy. My heart sank deep inside me. It was not just the insult, it was what it carried. Years of disrespect, betrayal, and pain. Those words carried with them more than sound. They carried meaning. Meaning that erased years of sacrifice. Meaning that declared all my efforts worthless. Meaning that told me my place was not within the family. They were words that turned love into dust. They were words that made me question my worth. I stood still, unable to speak. My mind was quiet, but my heart was loud with pain. I could feel the weight of every day I had given for him. I could feel the years I had worked without rest. I could feel every night I had stayed awake for his sake, and yet all of it seemed gone in that single moment. It was more than an insult. It was a declaration that I was not wanted, that I was not respected, that I had no place in his life, that my existence was a burden. It was a sentence that no father should hear from his own son. It was a wound deeper than any injury. For a moment I felt broken. I felt the years collapse under those words. I felt a lifetime of memories vanish. I felt my pride crumble. But as the shock faded, a fire began to grow inside me. It was not a fire of anger alone. It was a fire of resolve, a fire of truth, a fire of justice. I knew then that silence would be my defeat, that walking away quietly would only give him power over me, that ignoring the insult would allow the disrespect to grow. I could not allow that. I could not let those words become the truth of my life. I had to respond, not with violence, but with truth. That night, I sat alone in my room. I replayed the words again and again in my mind. I remembered the tone, the anger, and the cruelty in his voice. I remembered the way he looked at me. I remembered the faces of those who heard him. I remembered how my dignity felt stripped away. And in that quiet moment, I made a decision. I decided I would not answer in kind. I decided I would not use harsh words against him. I decided I would not stoop to his level, but I also decided I would not remain silent. I decided that truth must come forward, that justice must be seen. I began to gather evidence quietly. I began to speak to those who had seen his cruelty. I began to collect proof of the lies he spread. I began to write down the moments of disrespect. Every insult, every action, every moment became a piece of truth. Every piece became part of my plan. The cutting words were the spark. The years of disrespect were the fuel. My silence until then had been my endurance. But now, it became my strength. Now, I would prepare for the moment when silence would be broken. Now, I would wait for the right place to speak. The festival was that place. The place where all our people gathered, where voices could not be hidden, where truth could not be ignored, where respect could be restored before the eyes of all. I knew it was the right time. I knew it was the right moment. I knew it would change everything. That day, I would stand not as a man broken by words, but as a man strengthened by truth. I would stand not as a father who was silenced, but as a father who would speak. I would stand not to shame my son, but to expose his cruelty. I would stand to restore my honor and dignity. The words he spoke would no longer be his victory. They would be the moment he lost everything. They would be the moment I took back my place. The moment truth triumphed over insult. The moment respect was restored in the most public way possible. And I waited for that day with quiet strength, knowing that the cutting words were not the end, but the beginning of my proof, the beginning of my answer, the beginning of a story that would be told for years to come. That night after the insult, I could not sleep. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet except for the slow ticking of the clock. My mind was full of his words. "You're a shame to this family." The sound of them repeated in my head. They were not just words, they were a wound that burned deep inside me. I thought of the years I had worked for him, the years I had built a life with my own hands so he could have comfort, the nights I stayed awake worrying about his needs, the days I missed rest so he could rest, the clothes I wore until they tore so he could wear new ones. All those years of sacrifice seemed erased by that single moment. I thought of my own father, the lessons he gave me, the hard work he endured, the pride he took in his family. I remembered how he never spoke harshly, but he taught me to stand for what is right. I remembered how dignity was something to hold even when the world turned against you. I wondered if I had lost mine. In that silent night, I remembered every smile I gave my son when he was small, every tear I wiped from his eyes, every time I put his needs before my own, every dream I gave away so he could follow his, every prayer I whispered for his success. All those memories came flooding back, and they hurt more than the insult. I sat up and looked around my room. The photos on the wall, the worn chair, the lamp that still shone softly in the corner. Everything spoke of years lived and years given. I thought about what my life had been worth if it ended with such cruel words. I thought about whether my silence was still my strength or my defeat. I thought about forgiveness, whether I should forgive him and speak no more. But deep inside, I knew forgiveness would not be enough. His words were not just an insult to me. They were an attack on everything I had worked for. They were a declaration that my life, my work, and my dignity meant nothing to him. That could not go unanswered. I thought about what it meant to be a father, to give without expecting anything back, to protect without being asked, to love without condition. And yet, a father was also a man with pride, a man who deserved respect, a man who must protect his own dignity. That night, I realized my silence had protected him more than it had protected me. I sat there for hours in quiet thought. My mind wandered to the faces of neighbors and family. I thought of the whispered talks behind closed doors. I imagined the shame and confusion in their eyes if they knew the truth. I thought about whether I had been too quiet for too long, whether my silence had given him power over me and others. By the dawn, I had made my choice. I would no longer carry the burden alone. I would no longer let his words remain unanswered. I would turn my pain into proof. My silence would change into action. I would speak, not in anger, but in truth. I would prepare to show the world what he had done. I thought of where I could speak, where I could stand so that my voice could be heard, somewhere public, somewhere where the truth could not be denied, somewhere that mattered. My mind settled on the annual family festival, a place where our whole community came together, a place where my voice would reach many. I thought about the evidence I would need, proof that his words were not empty cruelty, proof that his actions matched his words, proof that respect had been taken from me and replaced by lies. I began to imagine gathering proof in a way that could not be challenged, that could not be ignored, that could not be erased. The more I thought, the clearer my plan became. I would not rush. I would not act in anger. I would act with patience and clarity. I would prepare myself to stand before everyone and speak the truth. I would prepare to show that respect is earned, not demanded, that dignity must be defended, that silence protects cruelty. For the first time in many nights, I felt a kind of peace, not peace of comfort, but peace of decision. I knew the road ahead would not be easy. I knew there would be resistance. I knew there would be more pain. But I also knew I could not go on living with the insult unanswered. I knew I had to stand for myself and my dignity. The insult had become a turning point. It was not just words anymore. It was the moment I decided to stop being silent. It was the moment I decided to turn my pain into strength. It was the moment I decided to show the truth in a way that could not be denied. That truth would become my voice. I thought of my own reflection in the mirror, an old man, tired but not broken, scarred but still standing, hurt but not defeated. I knew my body was weak, but my spirit was strong. That night I promised myself I would turn his cruelty into a lesson not just for him, but for everyone who heard it. I thought of my own story, how I had given everything for my son, how I had stood silent through disrespect, how I had kept faith in the hope of respect returning. But now, I knew that hope would not return without truth. I knew the truth must be spoken in the right place, in a way that could not be ignored. And so, I began to plan. I began to gather. I began to prepare. I knew I could not erase the pain, but I could transform it. I could turn the cutting words into a moment of truth. I could turn the shame into strength. I could turn silence into justice. I would wait. I would prepare. I would choose the right moment. And when that moment came, I would stand before everyone. I would reveal the truth. I would speak for the years of sacrifice. I would speak for my dignity. I would speak for the respect that was taken from me. That night, in the silence of my room, I found my voice. Not a voice of anger, but a voice of truth. Not a voice of hate, but a voice of dignity. Not a voice that sought revenge, but a voice that sought justice. I knew the festival would be my stage, and I knew that I would not be silent anymore. When morning came, I woke with a sense of purpose. The insult from my son still rang in my ears, but it was no longer a wound that weakened me. It had turned into fuel. I knew words alone would not be enough. I needed proof. I needed evidence to show everyone what had happened. I needed something that could not be denied. I began by looking for written proof. I remembered the old phone where my son had sent rude messages. I turned it on and searched for every insult, every cruel word, every moment when he showed his disrespect. I copied them carefully, saving screenshots and printing them. These words were part of the truth I was going to show the world. Then I thought about physical proof. I recalled the times he had shouted and shoved me. I remembered the bruises on my arms and the marks on my back. I took photos of each one, making sure they were clear. I kept them hidden at first. I knew the moment would come when these pictures would speak louder than my own words. I also began to gather witnesses. There were neighbors who had seen him treat me badly. There were friends and relatives who had heard his cruel words. I spoke to them quietly, telling them what had happened. Some were afraid to speak. Others were ready to support me. I wrote their names down, along with what they had seen or heard. I kept everything in a small folder, a quiet collection of truth. Each paper, each picture, each note was a piece of a larger story. A story of years of disrespect. A story of a father's pain. A story of a son's betrayal. I knew I must be careful. I must protect these pieces until the right moment came. At night, I would sit with the folder in my lap. I would look at each piece of evidence. I would remember the nights I stayed awake to work, the mornings I rose before the sun, the meals I skipped to feed him, the clothes I patched to keep him warm. All of it was part of the story now. All of it was part of my proof. I thought about how to present this evidence. It could not be done in haste. It must be done in a place where everyone would listen, where there was no escape from truth. I thought of the family festival. It was the one time the whole community gathered. It was a place where truth could be heard without interruption. I also thought about the risks. My son would be angry. He might deny everything. He might try to turn others against me. But I knew that if I waited, if I prepared, the truth would speak for itself. I knew the evidence would be stronger than any denial. I knew that when the time came, I would stand firm. I began keeping a journal. Every day I wrote what had happened. Every insult, every cruel action, every moment of humiliation. I wrote the date, the time, and the place. I wrote who had seen or heard it. These notes became another layer of proof, a layer no one could easily ignore. I also kept my own feelings in that journal. I wrote about the pain I felt, the sadness of losing my son's respect, the loneliness of carrying the insult alone. I wrote about my hope that the truth would set me free. I wrote that this was not about revenge, but about dignity. Weeks passed as I gathered my evidence. It was not easy. Each moment brought back pain. Each piece of proof reminded me of the years I had given. But I knew it was necessary. I knew the more I gathered, the stronger my truth would be. I knew I could not speak without proof. I began to arrange the evidence in order. Written insults first, then photos of bruises, then witness statements, then my own journal. I placed them in the folder neatly. I labeled everything clearly. This was not just preparation, it was a ritual of justice. I thought of the moment when I would stand with the folder, the moment when the insult would be answered. I imagined the faces of my family, of neighbors, of friends. I imagined their silence as they saw the truth. I imagined my son's face when he could no longer deny what he had done. My mind also prepared for questions. Some might ask why I had stayed silent for so long. Others might doubt my claims. I knew the answers. My silence was not weakness, but patience. My proof was not anger, but truth. And the time for answers was coming. Each day, I checked the folder. I added new notes if needed. I rechecked photos for clarity. I rewrote witness statements. This was my work now, my duty, my path to reclaiming dignity. I did not rush. I worked quietly, steadily, as a man who knew the value of preparation. I thought about how my son had underestimated me, how he had believed that his words would end my courage, how he had thought that silence was weakness. But I knew better now. Silence can protect cruelty, but truth destroys it. And I was preparing to speak that truth. The folder became my constant companion. I carried it to the small table in my room every night. I opened it, looked through the pieces of proof, and felt my resolve grow stronger. I knew the moment of truth was not far. I knew the insult had given me a purpose. I knew I was ready. I also thought about forgiveness again. I did not want hatred in my heart. My plan was not born of anger, but of a desire for justice. I wanted my family to see what happened. I wanted them to understand that disrespect is not something to be ignored. I wanted them to see that dignity must be defended. At the same time, I thought about the risk to my own peace. This path could bring more pain. It could bring more conflict. But I also knew peace without dignity was not real peace. I knew that to protect my dignity, I must speak. I must show the truth in a way no one could deny. So I prepared, not in haste, not in anger, but with patience. I arranged my proof, strengthened my resolve, and chose the place where truth would be revealed. I knew that the festival would be my stage, that my voice would be heard, that my silence would end. By the time the festival arrived, I was ready. My folder was full of proof. My heart was steady. My mind was clear. I knew I would stand in front of everyone and speak. I knew I would answer the insult. I knew I would turn cruelty into a lesson of truth. And so, in the quiet hours before the festival, I rested. I closed my folder and looked at the night sky. I thought of the words I would speak. I thought of the faces I would face. I thought of the dignity I would defend. I knew that the next day, silence would end and truth would begin. The moment of truth came quietly, but with force. I stood there on the small stage, holding my folder, the weight of years pressing on my shoulders. Around me, the festival crowd had grown silent. The music had stopped. The laughter had faded. All eyes were on me and my son. My son stood a few steps away, his face pale and tight with anger. His eyes darted toward the crowd, then away. He searched for words, but none came. I could see his pride breaking in real time. His arrogance was gone, replaced by doubt. I felt no triumph in his pain, only the stillness of justice unfolding. I opened the folder slowly, carefully. Inside were photographs, letters, and notes. Each piece was proof of years of cruelty. I placed them on the stage table so everyone could see. There were images of bruises hidden under long sleeves. There were written insults, each dated. There were witnesses' statements confirming the abuse. I began to speak, my voice steady, despite the storm in my heart. I spoke slowly so all could understand. I said that respect is not given because of blood alone. It is earned through honor, kindness, and care. I said my son had turned his back on those values, that his words were not only cruel, but destructive. The crowd listened in silence. No one interrupted. No one moved. They leaned closer, drawn by the weight of truth in my words. I could feel their attention like a tide pulling at me. I told them about every moment of pain, every silent tear, every night I had carried his insults without reply. I told them why I had chosen this place, this moment. I said this was not for vengeance, it was for justice. I told them that silence protects cruelty, but truth destroys it. I told them that I stood here not as a broken man, but as a man who had endured enough to demand change. That day, I would not walk away quietly. That day, the truth would stand in full light. My son stepped forward, finally finding his voice. His words were rushed, defensive. He denied the accusations. He called them lies. He said I was trying to humiliate him. I let him speak for a moment, letting his words hang in the air. Then I held up my photographs and letters and said, "Here is the proof." Truth does not need defense. The silence after my words was deep. 7 lines of stillness passed. People looked between us, whispering quietly. My son's face was pale now, his shoulders slumped. I could see shame settling over him. He looked at the ground, unable to meet anyone's gaze. I could see the weight of his words from before pressing back on him now. I continued to speak. I told the crowd that truth must be heard in the light, not hidden in corners. I told them that no insult could erase a lifetime of sacrifice, and no cruelty could silence justice forever. I spoke of forgiveness, but also of consequence. I said he had to answer for what he had done. The crowd shifted. Some nodded quietly. Some looked at me with respect. Others looked at my son with disbelief. Children stared wide-eyed, learning a lesson they would not soon forget. Neighbors whispered softly, sharing glances. I felt a strange calm as I spoke, as if years of pain were lifting from me. I opened my folder again, showing a final letter written by a neighbor who had witnessed the abuse. I read it aloud. It described moments I had never spoken of before. It confirmed every bruise, every insult, every betrayal. The words rang clear in the air. They were not mine alone. They belonged to truth and justice. The crowd grew quiet again. My son's voice had fallen to nothing. He looked around, as if searching for allies, but found none. I stepped back, letting the silence speak louder than words. I knew this moment would stay with them. I knew they would remember what happened here. That day, truth had been spoken. I folded my papers carefully. I stepped away from the table. The crowd remained still, holding on to the gravity of what they had heard. My son took a step back as well, looking small and defeated. I did not shout. I did not cry. I simply stood quietly, letting the truth settle in the hearts of all who had gathered. For me, this was not a moment of victory over him. It was a moment of peace for myself. I had spoken my truth. I had revealed his lies. I had stood before the world and shown what had been hidden too long. The insult he had given me had been answered in the loudest way possible. That day, at the festival, the air was heavy with truth. The music eventually returned, but it felt different. The laughter resumed, but it was quieter. People spoke softly, with new understanding. They looked at my son differently now, and they looked at me with respect. That silence after my words was the sound of justice. I stepped down from the stage slowly. The folder was still in my hands, but it felt lighter now. My heart was calm. I had stood up not only for myself, but for every truth that had been hidden by silence. I had shown that courage is not loud, but it is unshakable when it is armed with proof. From that day forward, my voice was never small again. I had learned that the right moment, the right place, and the right truth could change everything. My son had called me a shame, but the world now knew who was truly shameful. I walked away from that stage knowing my dignity was restored. The moment passed, but its effect did not fade. The festival continued, but the air was heavy. People no longer laughed as they had before. Whispers moved like a quiet wind through the crowd. Faces turned often toward my son. His pride, once tall and firm, had crumbled under the weight of truth. I stepped away from the stage and watched him stand frozen. His shoulders shook slightly. His hands trembled. I could see confusion in his eyes. No one knew what to say. The crowd waited, watching silently, letting the weight of what they had heard settle deep into their minds. The whispers became louder. Families talked quietly to one another. Some looked at me with respect. Others looked at my son with pity or disbelief. Children stared, learning without being told that truth matters. I felt no need to speak again that day. My voice had already been heard loud enough. My son did not approach me. He did not speak. He walked away slowly, head bowed, shoulders low. Neighbors watched him go. I saw some shake their heads in quiet sympathy. Others murmured softly, saying they wished they had known sooner. The silence that followed him was heavier than any argument. The festival faded into the evening. Lights glowed softly, music resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. My words had shifted something in the crowd. They saw something they had not before, the strength of truth and the weakness of lies. My son was no longer seen as proud and strong, but as one who had fallen. That night, people spoke of what they had witnessed. They talked about honor and shame. They spoke of respect and the pain of betrayal. My name was spoken quietly, with respect, my son's with regret. The wound between us had become public, and it could not be hidden. The truth had opened a new chapter for both of us. I did not go home that night. I stayed among the crowd for hours, listening to their conversations. I could hear them repeating my words. I could feel them turning over my proof in their minds. My son had vanished into the shadows, but my truth remained in the open light. That night, justice lived quietly in every whisper. The days that followed were harder for him. His friends spoke less to him. Relatives avoided his company. News of the festival spread quietly through the town. Some called it courage. Others called it shame. For me, it was simply truth fulfilled. I had spoken what could not be silenced any longer. I heard from neighbors that he avoided the streets he once walked with pride, that his business faced difficulties, that his voice was quieter now when he spoke. People watched him differently. They had seen his cruelty exposed, and they carried it quietly with them. My son had become a man changed, whether he accepted it or not. My own life settled into calm. The anger I had carried faded. I no longer felt the need to defend myself to anyone. The truth had done it for me. I saw people nod quietly when they passed. Children greeted me with smiles. I had given them something they would remember. The truth has power greater than any insult. Family gatherings after the festival were different. People spoke to me with respect. They asked about my story. They thanked me quietly for speaking up. My son was there, but he kept his distance. His voice was soft when he spoke, as though he feared the weight of my words still hung over him. The silence between us was not peace, it was understanding. Time passed, but the moment stayed alive. At gatherings, people still mentioned the festival. They still spoke of the courage it took to stand and speak the truth. I felt a quiet pride in knowing that I had changed something. I had not sought revenge. I had sought truth. And truth had changed everything between us and within me. I began to notice a change in myself too. My steps were lighter. My heart was calmer. I spoke less, but with more certainty. I no longer feared being alone. I knew my dignity was intact. The insult he gave me was replaced with something stronger, proof and peace. The burden of silence had been lifted. There were days I heard his name spoken quietly in the market. I knew people remembered. I knew they told the story again to others. My son had lost more than pride. He had lost trust. He had lost respect, and he could not gain them back without truth, which he had turned away from. The ripple of that moment grew beyond my family. Neighbors began to speak openly about truth and respect. The children who heard me that day at the festival carried the lesson with them. I had given them something more than words. I had given them an example. For me, the fallout was not just about my son. It was about a lesson for everyone. That truth matters more than pride. That courage can be quiet and still be loud. That respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. The day I stood at the festival, I taught that without speaking, truth cannot exist. Years later, the silence between me and my son remained. We saw each other only at family gatherings. Words were few. Eyes were heavy with memories of that day. I never regretted speaking. I never wished I had stayed silent. I knew that what I had done was right. Truth was my answer, and it had been heard. That day at the festival was a turning point for me. It was the moment when silence ended, when the burden of years of pain was lifted, when truth became the loudest voice of all. My son had shouted at me that I was a shame. I had replied in the only way that mattered, by showing the truth. The silence that followed my words was not empty. It was full of justice, respect, and understanding. My son had lost his shield of lies. I had gained my voice. That day, I stood before the world, not in anger, but in quiet dignity. I had revealed the truth, and the world had listened. Even now, as an old man, I can still see the faces of that crowd. I can still feel the weight of the moment. I can still hear my own voice, speaking truth into the silence. My son had called me a shame, but the truth had made him a lesson, and the world had seen it. That day, truth became louder than insult. Silence became stronger than cruelty. And dignity became a voice that could not be broken. The festival was more than an event. It was the place where justice found its voice, and I will carry that moment with me until my last breath. After speaking at the festival, I walked away slowly, without looking back. The crowd was quiet, still thinking about what they had just heard. My steps were steady, but my heart was heavy with years of pain and sacrifice. I had not come there to shame my son, but to speak the truth. The evening air was cool. The music and laughter of the festival continued, but I moved through it as if in a different world. Faces turned to watch me leave. Some nodded quietly. Others kept their eyes lowered. I could feel the weight of their thoughts pressing quietly on me. I did not rush. I wanted to leave with calm dignity. I knew that once I stepped away, the moment I had created would live in the minds of those who had witnessed it. I carried no bitterness, only a quiet sense that something important had been said. My son was gone, but the silence between us was louder than ever. I knew there would be no easy words to repair what was broken, but I also knew I had given him something he could not deny, the truth. That truth was now his burden. As I reached the edge of the festival, I glanced back once. The crowd was still there, talking quietly among themselves. I felt a quiet peace knowing they had heard me. My voice had found its place in the silence, and it was enough. Walking away that night, I knew I had taught a lesson without raising my hand or striking back. I had taught it with proof and courage. That was a victory I would carry for the rest of my life. I had turned pain into truth and cruelty into a lesson for everyone. The exit was not an end. It was a beginning. For me, for my family, and for everyone who had heard. The silence that followed me was not emptiness, but a living echo of what had been revealed that night. I had stepped away, but my voice remained. Now, many years later, I tell the story calmly, without anger or regret. My son's words still echo in my mind, but they no longer hurt. He shouted that I was a shame. I answered in silence filled with truth. I learned that dignity cannot be taken away by words alone. I lost a son's respect, but I kept my own dignity. I learned that truth is stronger than insult. That silence can protect cruelty, but speaking truth exposes it. That courage does not need noise, it needs proof. And proof changes hearts and minds more than any argument ever could. I have learned that respect is earned, not demanded. My son's insult was a wound, but the truth became my healing. I did not stand at that festival for revenge. I stood for truth, for justice, for my dignity. And in doing so, I found peace. The silence between my son and me remains. We rarely speak, but I carry no bitterness. I carry the lesson that truth is never quiet forever. It will find its voice, whether spoken softly or shouted loudly. That lesson is more important than any inheritance or apology. When I look back, I see that day as a turning point, not just for me, but for everyone who heard me. I see how truth can stand firm in a world of lies, how dignity can survive insult, how courage can be quiet and still be heard by all. My final thought is simple. He called me a shame. I stood before the world and showed them his lies. I gave them proof of cruelty, and in doing so, I reclaimed my honor. That day was not about winning an argument. It was about showing the power of truth. He shouted at me to break me, but instead, he made me stronger. He gave me a reason to speak, to stand, and to show the world what real shame was. I turned his cruelty into a lesson for everyone, and that lesson will live forever. Truth is louder than insult. Silence can protect the guilty, but courage gives voice to the innocent. I stood at the festival, not as a victim, but as a man who had learned that dignity is worth more than pride, and truth is worth more than silence.